If we can, go ahead and get started. A couple of things real quick. I know we have several folks from this year's beekeeping class here. I'd like to welcome them. Thank you for coming. Do we have any first-time people here tonight? Thank you. Appreciate you coming and being with us this evening. If you have not put your name in for the door prizes, it's in the back. You can go ahead and put your name in. And if you don't have your 50-50 raffle ticket yet, there's plenty of them to be had. This evening, we're fortunate to have Charles Fleming here to talk with us about small-scale queen rearing. So if you would, please welcome Charles. Thank you.
Thank you. This is amazing. Mark said normally there's only about 5 or 10 people here, and so you heard that I was coming, and so we packed the house. My name is Charles Fleming. I'm with the Harnett County Beekeepers Association. I like to get out and talk about bees, and I thank Mark for inviting me out. So we've got a few first-year beekeepers. Do we have about 5 to 10 years beekeepers out here? Show of hands. How about 20 or 30 years? All right, so these guys with their hands up, they're the ones that are going to be keeping me honest. All right, so I've been beekeeping for about 10 years, and I'm here to talk with you about queen rearing. And I'll stop turning around so I can see down right here what I'm going to show you folks. Here we go. So I go around and I talk because the Harnett County Beekeepers, the association purpose is to foster closer relations among beekeepers, share ideas, improve beekeeping methods, and to educate the general public. So I've thrown together a few presentations to help foster and meet the association purpose. Is anybody familiar with Harnett County? Anybody know whereabouts that is? We're located between Fayetteville and Raleigh. So about a 2.5 hour drive for us. I got to figure out where I got to put this thing. Here we go. So if anybody is just on any given Thursday, first Thursday any month, it just feels like driving 2.5 hours to come see us in Harnett County, you're absolutely welcome to come join us. 7 p.m. at the Harnett County Ag Center. You can also look us up on Facebook. And there's my contact information, just in case anybody wants to get in touch with me, or my email address. I believe, I always throw this in, the Nancy covers this county. Correct, Nancy does not cover this county. Okay. So for Harnett County, Nancy Rupert covers. Who covers, Mark?
Greg Ferris.
Greg Ferris, okay. But, so if you call Nancy, she'll give you Greg's phone number. No problem. So a little bit about me. I'm a hobby beekeeper. I'm a full-time software engineer. I've been doing that for about 20 years now. I started beekeeping, I think I took a beginner course back in 2010, and I got hooked, and I really enjoy it. I am a certified beekeeper within the Master Beekeeping program, and I'm certified to sell bees. I sell my own bees. I'm not a reseller. And again, just a little plug for myself, Bradfield's Bee Yard, if you're on Facebook, want to follow me. Mark came out and I started following his page, and puts a lot of nice information up. But if you're on Facebook, you're certainly welcome to reach out to me there. So a little bit of information about selling bees in North Carolina. I pulled this off of the state site. Parties interested in selling bees, you have to do a little bit of paperwork. You have your state aviaries come out and do an inspection in your apiary. You can sell up to 10 without being certified, but as soon as you go more than 10, you should be certified by the state. And there are a few exceptions to that if you're going out of business. But again, this information is on the state website. There's a easy enough form. Make sure you sign your form, because ask me how I know, they will not process it. Luckily for me, their office is in Raleigh, and that's a relatively short drive for me, so I drove into the main office just to sign that, and then everything was okay. So today, I would like to help you to better understand natural queen rearing, translating that to artificial queen production, some of the specialized equipment that I use, as well as my first year how-to calendar. Now I say mine because I'm sure that you know, if you ask 10 beekeepers the same question, you're going to get 11 different answers. So this is what I'm covering for me, this is what works for me, but hopefully it'll be helpful for you as well if you are learning. Another quick show of hands, do we have queen rearers in here? So we got here, all right, and these guys, they'll also keep me honest, so this is good. I'm gonna watch out for them, see if they're kind of smirking or if they're buying what I'm selling. All right, so a quick refresher though. So I did see a show of hands that there are some first-time attendees here, and I guess you recently had a beginner course. Harnett County, I taught ours last Saturday. But so a quick refresher, honeybees go through complete metamorphosis. They're an egg. You need to be able to recognize an egg. Larvas, they incubate, and finally an adult honeybee. It's very important to understand that because as a beekeeper, we need to understand the bees and work with them. Drones. So drones, they don't tend to the hive, but they do look for, and they don't forage, but they do look for mating opportunities. So they're rather important if we're talking about queens and queen rearing, that we have drones available in our apiary. We have workers, they're all females. They live roughly about 6 weeks during the summer. Except during winter, they get a slightly extended lifespan. But for the first 3 weeks, they're what we refer to as house bees, and one of their duties is that they have specialized glands for feeding and for feeding the queen during queen rearing. So it's important that we have a good group of young bees available for us when we're talking about queen rearing. The older bees are good for foraging. Gathering the 4 resources: pollen, nectar, water, and tree sap for crops. And lastly, we have queens. It's estimated that a good queen will live about 2 to 3 years. It's debatable if the queen is really still good in their second, especially their third year. But scientifically, they're certainly capable of living that long. It's worth noting and understanding that they go and take their mating flights on or about the 20th to 24th day after they have emerged. Once mated, they approximately lay 1,500 to 2,000 eggs daily, and typically 1 queen per hive. They do go through complete metamorphosis. For new beekeepers, it's important that you understand this timeline. The workers, 21 days, the drones, 24 days, and the queens, 16 days. Everybody's pretty much created equal. The first 3 days they're eggs. On the 4th day they learn to larvae. Looking at the bottom line, 4th through roughly 7th day they are open. So that's only about 4 days that they are open, brood, and that they are receiving that royal jelly from the worker bees. So it's a rather quick process. So let's understand what happens naturally, what the honeybees do naturally to produce queens, and then we should probably be able to apply that in an artificial manner. So during natural queen production, there are generally 3 scenarios where they tend to create queens. Swarming, That's probably the one we're most familiar with. An emergency situation, as well as a supersedure situation. Notable conditions during swarming are there's a strong mother-queen present. There's generally a strong nectar flow. Excuse me, the hive is very crowded, populous of all ages, so that would be young worker bees as well as older worker bees. Generally consistently warm weather. So in Harnett County, we had, I think it was 2 weeks ago, our first reported swarm. These bees are just so confused with this warm weather. It's hot and cold, hot and cold. But I guess they didn't, in our area, they didn't check WRAL weather site to see if it was going to get cold again. So that was our first one. But generally, it behooves them to do this when there's consistently warm weather. A superior queen is generally reared from a 4-day-old brood. That's generally, it's an ideal condition, and they start many queen cells, and usually the first one that emerges will go around and cull the others, and becomes basically the winner in that situation. So some notable conditions of emergency. So in an emergency situation, there is no queen present. The conditions may not be ideal, and generally there are inferior queens reared from whatever brood happens to be available. The third condition is supersedure. It's similar to the emergency, but there's a queen present, but perhaps she's failing, she's aging, for whatever reason, she's just not laying up to snuff. The pheromones are a little low, but they're looking to replace a failing queen. The conditions also may not be ideal at the time of the year, and the queens likely will be inferior because they are created from whatever brood happens to be available at that time. So during artificial queen production, it's good for us to focus on the emergency situation as well as the swarming situation. And here in this picture, you get anything out that looks remotely fun, and the children just want to get right in. So here it is, I think, my 6-year-old sitting on my wife's lap doing some grafting on our front porch. I don't think kids took though. All right, so for artificial queen production, I use 2 separate hives. I use one as a starter hive, and I use a finisher hive. So in the starter hive, we understand the emergency impulse, and we leverage that. We create queenless conditions, and we put lots and lots of young workers in there because we know the young workers are the ones with the specialized glands for rearing these queens. In the finisher hive, what we're doing is we're understanding and leveraging the swarming impulse of honeybees. There's a strong mother queen that's present in this finisher hive. There's a strong nectar flow. You simulate having, well, you don't simulate, you actually should hopefully have a very crowded, populous hive with all ages. You've got young bees and older bees. Generally, consistently warm weather. We have the benefit of being able to look at the weather forecast and understanding what time of year we're in, looking at the frost dates and things of that nature. Superior queens can be reared from those 4-day-old brood. You generally have ideal conditions. But as a beekeeper, if you're trying to rear these queens, you don't want to simulate the first queen emerging and going through and pulling out those other drafts that you have. So looking for this, as you're setting this up, looking for a strong mother queen. So you generally look at the good tight brood pattern. So in this image here, you can see it's packed full of brood. And those are the kind of traits that you want to look for. Are the bees calm? Things like that. But good, strong, healthy colony where you want to foster those genetics moving forward. You want to make sure that you're working with a crowded hive. So when you pull that lid off, or you pull that second deep off, you want to see those bees spilling out, as in this picture here. Don't start with something where they're only covering 5 of those 10 frames. We can mimic a strong nectar flow by using an in-hive feeder. In this image here, I have a frame feeder available, and that's what I use. We can't mimic the warm weather, but we can look at the forecast and have a generally good idea about when it's going to be a good time. Look for 70, 75 degree weather where it's going to be kind of consistent. And then at that point, you know, just as time is available to you as a beekeeper in your apiary, go ahead and rear to your heart's content. We have the benefit of being able to identify those visually. There are other methods too. You could seclude your queen to a specific frame and understand and know how old the larvae are. You can visually see that. So we look for grafting those larvae that have just been 1 day old, emerged from an egg, so the 4-day-old brood. Originally I used cell punching, but I've moved over to grafting. I realized that the cell punching just leaves a whole bunch of holes in all my frames and I don't get quite as many queens. But it worked. It was something that worked for me just as I was learning, moving along. But I realized that I didn't want to ruin all my frames. For every time that you did a cell punch, you would get one out, but you would get 4 or 5 around the periphery of that ruined, and then you would also ruin the 5 or 6 egg or larvae brood on the other side of the frame. So I moved towards grafting. And here in this picture here, you can see my wife. She did a lot of my grafting the first year. Well, I had to try it to see it was better. So, my artificial queen production. You do need some specialized equipment. It's a little bit different than just starting your first year and getting your bees. Queen excluders are very useful during queen rearing or queen production. When I took a beginner course, everybody referred to queen excluders as honey excluders because generally people want to use them to keep the queen from laying, arching up and laying eggs in your supers. I found that it seems to restrict my bees in my apiary to do that. So I never used queen excluders. I never purchased any. But somehow I ended up with about 20 or 30 queen excluders. I think it's just beekeepers. When you do stuff like this, beekeepers are just some of the nicest folks, but sometimes they realize that they don't want to do it any longer, and they end up giving you equipment. And so I've ended up with, I've never purchased a queen excluder, but I got like 20 or 30 of them. Once I had a few of them, I started thinking maybe I should find some opportunities to use that. I did try them for honey production, no good, great for queen rearing. I use wax cell cups. You can purchase plastic cell cups, but I make my own. I don't rear that many, so I don't mind sitting in front of the kitchen, or in the kitchen in front of the oven, making my own cell cups. The in-hive feeders, as I already mentioned, I use a frame feeder. Some kind of enclosed or ventilated nuke box. Usually if you've purchased, you'll end up and you've got a few of these nuke boxes laying around. I've had some people think that they'll never use them again, and they've given them to me. I know better than that. Nuke boxes are always very useful. So if you happen to get a 5-frame nuke box, this is your first year, and that's how you get these, go ahead and keep that, because it will come in handy in a year or two. Specialized queen rearing frames, some cell protectors, mating nukes. There are various types of mating nukes, as well as using queen cages. So a queen excluder, probably many people are familiar with this. This usually comes with beginner kits if you purchased a complete hive. I think all the ones I've been given are plastic, but they also come in metal. The wax cell cups, you can see in this image, I make my own. I took a little wooden stick that was in my shop, I found it on the floor. I whittled it down until it was about the right size that would fit in a natural queen cell that the bees had produced. And then I did that in melted wax 4 or 5 times, and then I pulled the cup off, and that's what we end up with. In-hive feeders, there are hive top feeders and frame feeders, but it's important to have that simulated nectar flow. within that hive. Enclosed and ventilated nuc boxes, the bees will get very warm, so it's important to make sure it's properly ventilated. As I had mentioned, I moved towards using Chinese grafting tools. I had previously used cell punches, and I made mine out of copper pipe. But I thought I would upgrade a little bit, and I've tried using these. They work fine for me. I've contemplated using other grafting tools just to see, what the difference is, if I have more success or worse success with them. But I haven't done that just yet, so I've settled in on the Chinese grafting tool. Queen rearing frames, they sell these specialized. If there's somebody that's looking to buy something, there's somebody that's looking to sell you something. But I just used an old broken deep frame, some scrap off of my wood shop, and I built my own. The frame has 2 bars in there, the one at the top and the one in the middle, and they are removable. I did happen to bring that with me. Most of this equipment I brought with me. I won't bother holding up and showing everybody, but if anybody wants to come up and see the equipment and ask questions afterwards, I'll be more than happy to talk with you about that. Cell protectors, I think some people call these hair rollers. They look like the old-fashioned hair rollers, but you can put them over the queen cells to keep the queen from emerging and calling the others out. A queen castle, or some kind of mating nuc. So this particular image is, I tried these. You basically just take a regular deep, you put 3 dividers in the middle of it, and you end up with 4 sections that will hold 2 frames. And then you drill a hole on each side so that the queens are coming out and the bees can come and go from 4 different directions. I used those in my first year. Queen cages, people generally don't want you to just hand them a queen in the palm of their hand and put them in their pocket, so it's handy to have some queen cages with you. All right, so my first how-to calendar. This image right here has my daughter, because I think she saw her brother in a previous slide, so I had to put her in the slide too. Here she is with us. So there is a little bit of prep work that you need to do in your apiary before you're doing this. This is 1 or 2 weeks before you plan to do your grafting. Go out, look for a strong hive, preferably one that is fully filling 2 deeps. That will be your mother and your finisher hive. You're looking for a good queen to move forward. You're going to find that queen and place her in the bottom box. And this is where the queen excluder comes on, because you put the queen excluder in at that point, and then you place a second deep on top of that. And I generally create an entrance also on the top, so the inner cover and the outer cover, I'll wedge something in there so that there's enough space for the bees to come and go, so that they don't have to go through that queen excluder. They can come and go from the bottom or come and go from the top. And here's a very crude illustration of what I'm talking about. So at the top we've got the outer cover with the inner cover in there. You can see the top entrance. I've got just an so slightly open spot there. The top box is no queen present. The bluish grayish area there in the middle is where I have my queen excluder. The queen is now down at the bottom, and then you've got the bottom entrance where they're normally coming in. So this is about what you do a week or 2 ahead of your grafting. So you decided, okay, today's the day. Now the other thing, remember, I'm a full-time software engineer, so I do most of my stuff around weekends. I sit in my office a lot, although actually the last couple of months I started telecommuting, and it's just the greatest thing. I think I'm going to get so much more beekeeping done at home. But don't tell my boss this, don't tell my boss this. But when I came up with this, it was geared towards understanding that we all work. Beekeeping is probably just a really big hobby that we're interested in. I'm a little jealous of anybody who gets to do this full time, but I'm not quite there yet. So weekend 1, Saturday, in the morning, I start my starter hive. So early afternoon, I'll take 2 to 3 frames from that top box of that prep hive that I just mentioned earlier. I will look for pollen and honey frames, and I will try to avoid getting uncapped frames. You don't want larvae in there that they'll start to try to rear queens with. So generally I put the pollen or honey food store frames in there. I'll put the grafting frame in there that has just the empty queen cells, the frame feeder, and I will shake lots of bees into this box. Now what I do is when I shake these bees, I want to know that I have young bees in this box, because those young bees are the ones that have those specialized glands for rearing queens. Unfortunately, they don't carry around little ID cards with their birth date, but fortunately, if we understand how the honeybees work, the younger bees, their job is to tend to the larvae and the brood. So by shaking the bees off of the frames that have the eggs and larvae on there, we know that we get a majority of those young workers. So shake those from brood frames. As I mentioned, lots of ventilation or the bees will overheat. Ask me how I know. And because they are going to keep that nice and toasty in there. So make sure that you move that close it up and move it to a nice shaded area. They're going to be enclosed in there. They're not going to be able to fly from this high, but plenty of ventilation. Late afternoon. All right, so you go home, you eat lunch, and then you come back again in the late afternoon back into your bee yard. So the exact same Saturday, but after lunch, later that afternoon, you go back into your starter hive and you look for an egg frame. Look for the egg and larvae. If there are eggs on there, odds are pretty good there's going to be larvae on there of the right age. Place that frame from the top box. Let's see, what have I got here? Remove the egg and larvae, place frame from the top box in its place. I don't know what I meant by that. Okay, so there's going to be that empty space in there. I've started to, there's so much switching frames around, I usually just leave that open space. Now, you would know that if you leave a frame out for a week or two, the honeybees will build some bird comb down in that. So you don't want to do that for an extended period of time. But in this process, that frame's only going to be missing for a day, so I'll leave that slot open. But if you're a little bit worried that they will start to backfill that with some bird comb, then certainly put in a frame as a space filler there. And then put the mother hive back together. Go back to the queen rearing frame that you put in your nuke. Pull that out. The reason that was in there for a day is because those bees will go through and clean those cups out. They'll polish them. And it's rather amazing how much more clean they do look after that. Remove that queen rearing frame, shake the bees back in, close them back up. Do your grafting. Sometimes I do it sitting in my pickup truck. Sometimes I carry it back to the house. If it's a really nice day out in a shaded area, I just do it sitting out on the tailgate. But do your grafting in a well-lit area. If you're doing it outside, it certainly helps to have the sun a little bit over you, but you don't want the sun directly shining on the eggs or the larvae in there, so as to not dry them out. And generally take your time with this. It can be a little nerve-wracking at first, the first couple times, but you'll do much better for just relaxing and taking your time during this process. After you have grafted, take those grafts and then put them back in the queenless nuke. So this is day one. Again, this is my son who just had to get in on the action. So what you're looking for here, you can see eggs. Hopefully you're able to identify eggs. And in that general vicinity of where you see eggs, around the periphery of that, or pretty close by, you should see larvae that have not yet taken on a telltale C shape, but more like a semicolon or a comma shape. They will be in a small bit of royal jelly. So in this image here, on the upper right-hand corner is about what you're looking for. On the bottom left is much too old. Weekend one, the next day, Sunday. So You go to your starter hive, and you will be moving the contents from the starter hive to your finisher hive. So you take 2 to 3 frames that were in the nuke, and you will place them in the top box of your finisher hive. Place the grafts near the center and next to an egg larvae frame. Having the graft frame next to another brood frame helps to draw those young workers to the general vicinity. And while they're tending to that larger frame, they will also be tending to your graft frame. I moved the feeder over, so you want to continue with that simulated nectar flow. And then shake the remaining bees. Some of them will not want to come from their new home. Just get them back out, shake them back into the hive. And then your starter hive is now an empty new box ready for your next cycle again. And everything is in the finisher hive. It's rather amazing that this is about what you can expect. Now you can see in this image here, I do stuff on the cheap because I spend a lot of money. Beekeeping is a rather expensive hobby, but what I did here in this particular image is I just have scrap pieces of wood that I effectively glued to my bars using melted wax. A couple drops of melted wax, and I put those on there. So in looking at that, you can pull those little pieces of wood off of there. But you can see that where they've started to already draw out a lot of those. At this point, you can generally tell which ones have been accepted and which ones have not. But this is what the frame will be looking like when you pull it out of your starter nuke and you are placing it in your finisher hive. So that's weekend 1. 5 days of work, boring work, but it pays the bills, and then you're into weekend 2. By this point, it's kind of dependent on the weather because you've grafted the previous weekend. Maybe it's raining, maybe it's not. The 7-day forecast is kind of good. The 10-day forecast not so good. But sometime generally between Saturday and Tuesday is a safe time for you to get in there and put those cell protectors over there to keep the first queen from coming out and pulling out the rest of your grafts. This is about what that would look like. It's a beautiful thing to see all those nice peanut-shaped queen cells on there. And after you've placed the little hair rollers over it, this is about what it looks like. This one's not my frame, but I grabbed this image because I couldn't find it. I'm sure I've got a picture of one of my frames in my apiary somewhere, but for the presentation I just could not find it. So this is somebody else's image here. So another 5 days of boring work, and then you come to weekend 3, and so you're looking at a Saturday. By this point, those queens have emerged, and so you're making up your mating yard, looking to see that you've got enough space for all of those queens that you've had to emerge. Add these unmated queens to the nukes. In this particular picture here, I'm setting it up in one of my pastures, and earlier I showed the hive box where it was divided into 4 sections, 2 frames in each of those sections, so you effectively have 4 starting nukes. Those are those boxes that I'm putting out there, spacing them out. Putting shaking bees into each section, making them queenless, so that hopefully they'll accept their unmated new queen that I will introduce that Sunday, because they've been without a queen for roughly a day now at this point. Some of them have flown back, but the younger workers, they're still there, and hopefully they'll be happy to see a new queen. My first year, I did put the emerged unmated queens in there, very similar to introducing a queen in any other method. If you've purchased a queen before, they're in a queen cage, introduce them in there, some kind of marshmallow or candy for a slow release. The worker bees will chew through that candy, eat through that candy, and then that queen will come out at that point. But usually when you purchase a queen, she's already mated, but in this case, you're introducing an unmated queen. So skip a couple weekends, and you're biting your fingernails, wondering how well they're doing out there in their mating flights. Come weekend 6, you check those frames, and you look to see do you have a successfully mated queen laying actively within those nukes. That there are only 2 frames there, you have to be mindful, they're going to grow kind of fast. But that's the end of that process there, a matter of 6 weekends. It's a rather quick process. So recapping, weekend 1, Saturday morning, making a queenless nuke. Saturday afternoon, I do my grafting. Sleep, Sunday, late afternoon, I will transfer the contents from the starter hive back to my finisher hive. The next weekend, I go out and I place the cell protectors over that, the queen cells, because they will be emerging fairly soon. Weekend 3, Saturday, I count the number of queens that have emerged. So you pull that frame out, you see them running around in those little hair rollers, those cell protectors. Count how many you've got, go out and make nukes for each of those. And then Sunday, introduce those unmated queens to those nukes, and then take 4 and 5 off, and then come back weekend 6 and see if you have successfully mated queens. Any questions on that overall process? Yes, sir.
In your mating yard, what do you guys set up for drones?
That's a good question. So I don't pay any particular attention to fostering a large population of drones. I just note that in my apiary that there are drones being produced. I know that I have some neighbors within the vicinity that are also beekeepers. And then I've got drones in my apiary, you've got drones in these apiaries. So I just rely on it, the natural process. I don't do anything to foster more genetics. I know there are some more advanced ways of doing that. They can brood frame or an unmated queen to make sure that she that lays plenty of unmated. So when she lays unmated, I'm sorry, I'm moving away, thank you. Sorry, Mark. Mark warned me, he said, you better not get away from that microphone. But, yeah. So, but I don't do anything special with that, just what's in the natural population. So I saw another hand. Any other questions?
What's your success rate?
My success rate. All right, so as far as the grafts being took, I get about a 60 to 70% grafting success rate. But I drop down, once it's out of my control, to about 40 to 50% successfully mated and returned back. But I realize that we're in a swampy area, and we have lots of dragonflies in our area, and I think that really affects my return rate. But that's a bit out of my control. You know, if I do 20, 40 queens, and I get 10 or 20, that's still a good return on my effort, I think. And again, I've not been doing it too long. There are, you know, folks doing it get a lot better return rate than I do.
You feed 1-to-1.
At that point, it's roughly 1-to-1, simulating a natural nectar flow. Any other questions? All right.
The hair curler thing, protection, can the worker bees go through that, or is it totally isolated?
Okay, so it's asking on the protectors, can the queens go through, or can the workers go through that to get to the queens? They cannot, but there's enough ample space for them to be able to feed them through that, so they feed through there. Yes, sir?
So you said you're setting up your mating nukes, you're just shaking nurse bees in there?
That's correct.
Industrial?
Yep, shake nurse bees over there.
Decrease in acceptance with the approaching queens once they have established a brood in there versus when they're just nurse bees without brood?
That's a good question. I've not set up my hives in any manner to try to figure out if there are better acceptance methods by having brood or not having brood in it.
Once that queen's emerged, I assume you pick her up with another virgin in there, right? If you're two-frame mating nuke.
No, in my two-frame mating nuke, so when I make up my two-frame mating nuke, I will probably put a frame of pollen or food in there and an empty frame or a wax foundation, brand new. and I shake lots of nurse bees in there. And so they begin working, drawing out that new foundation, and there's some food in there for them to consume. And they are roughly queenless from Saturday to Sunday for about 24 hours before I introduce that queen. And so
So once you catch that point,
once I catch that queen,
do you put another virgin queen in that egg?
I will, but my cycle's not that fast. That's something that I have to work on, having that back-to-back cycle of I pull a queen out, then I put another one back in. I'm not always that good with that. Now, mind you, it's not my full-time job, and so I'm not always able to do drafting every weekend. But it is possible, depending on how many young workers you
I was
have.
asking like your success rate with basically installing a virgin queen on the brood versus no brood.
Right. I can't necessarily speak to that. Maybe there's some folks in here, so does anybody else want to attempt to answer that? Because this is one of the other reasons why I like going and speaking, because it's an opportunity for me to learn as well.
But I can speak for myself saying that I can't be successful.
You have not?
It's so easy.
No. So let's not. I won't try that then. I won't try that. No. I do have my next slide here. I see I've got some first-year lessons I've learned, but I don't know. I don't think I necessarily speak to the success of them taking that virgin queen or not. Now I have noticed that on about the third or fourth queen that I introduced, the workers that are in there have started to age out, and they're kind of like, no, we're not doing that anymore. That's not our job. So it behooves you to put fresh bees within your mating loops. Yes, sir.
Have you ever tried that queen walk into your hive?
I have not. I bite my nails too much, get too nervous, so I always do the slow introduction. That's a good question. I mean, I might have to try it this year just to see. So if I come back next year and I talk with you, I can say I tried it. This is what I learned. But I've not yet tried that. Any other questions? Good questions. All right. So some first year lessons that I learned. I learned that my wife is a much better grafter than I am. It's a lot easier too to do grafting. I started with the cell punch method because I thought that would be easier for me. But once I tried the grafting, it's actually a very simple process. Mating flights are hit or miss, as I mentioned. I did fairly well for my acceptance rate of actual grafting and finishing the cells, but it's out of my control once they take those mating flights. Don't count on always being able to get to the apiary when you plan on it. I think I'm going to have a lot better go at it this year since I'm telecommuting, I think I'll be spending a lot of my lunch breaks out in my apiary. You do need a lot of support hives. In that method where I'm using the 2-frame nukes, there's a lot of bees that you need to fill up that space and to keep that brood at the ideal temperature. I did have, try to skimp on it, see how many do I need, what's the fewest that I can use. Sometimes you put the bees in there and I guess they feel like they're outnumbered and they just kind of quit the nuke and they abscond. It takes a lot of bees to manage those. Yes, sir.
Yes, what kind of medium liquid do you put them over into your queen starter cells? Or do you just use what's in the cell and put over into the queen cell?
So when I'm grafting,
Yes. When you're
I just use what's in the cell. I have seen methods where individuals will find existing queen cells. They'll pull them out and then maybe put a little bit of water or something in there, mix it up, and then I think they refer to that as wet grafting. So that's where you're introducing some roll jelly. I do dry grafting. So just whatever roll of jelly comes up with that larva that I'm grafting is what they're going with. Good question. Buyers, I've recognized and realized that they generally expect kind of a 9-to-5 business. And so at the time when I was working in the office, it was about a 40-minute commute for me, and people wanted queens, roughly that 9-to-5 time frame. And so I had to work around that. there were a few lessons that I learned. Ants love that candy that's in there. I tried one time, I had somebody from a neighboring town say, I can come by probably 11 o'clock. I said, okay, I'll go out before work, I'll put it in the queen cell, I'll leave it on this special spot on the porch, you come by, you get her, leave the money, and then we'll be good. I came home that evening, the queen cell was still there, opened it up, looked at it, the queen was perished in there, and he emailed me a little bit later, said, I stopped by, but the ants were all over her and she was dead. So that didn't work out, I won't be doing that again. I share that with you in case you were considering doing the same. Don't do it. I've tried banking, but I generally prefer to have a queen working and just let her lay. But I have tried banking queens in an attempt to make it a lot easier to retrieve them. So if somebody says, hey, you know, I can be by at 5:30, okay, I'll hurry up, I'll meet you there after work, but I've got to go do baseball practice or something, so it's really quick, and so I can reach into that. So I've tried that, but I'm not a really big fan of that. I figure if I've got 20 queens, and I'd rather have them out working than laying, rather than just being cooped up in a cage. The heat in the midsummer, it did affect, so I tried grafting as soon as I could graft. You know, in springtime, I was trying grafting all year long, and I noticed that I had, my success rate was dwindling as it got hotter and hotter. So although there was another, I ended up taking them into the house to keep them cooler, but I think what I realized is when I went back out to my starter hive, or rather my finisher hive, my queen was not in the top box, but I noticed that there were eggs up there. So somewhere along the process, I accidentally let a queen into the top box. She probably emerged from a frame cell that I just was not aware of. And she, of course, didn't like when I would introduce those starter cups in the finisher hive. She just went through, pulled them all out. The worker said, no, we've got a queen in here, no need for that. So I just couldn't figure that out until I saw a couple weeks later there were eggs and larvae where there wasn't supposed to be eggs and larvae. There is a very high demand for queens. I'm not sure in this area, but the reason I started rearing queens is just so that I could provide queens largely for Harney County beekeepers. Being so involved in the Harney County Beekeepers Association, I'm on the receiving end of questions of how can I, where can I get such and such. And I realized that there's a lot of questions about where can I get queens. And I was running out of places to tell them. And so I thought, well, you know, why not? Why not me? So there's really high demand for that. You can quickly grow your apiary. It's just amazing how fast you go. You don't have to wait on catching those swarms. The genetics are proven. The bees are in your apiary. They're doing well in your apiary. It makes sense that their descendants are going to do well in your apiary and within your area. I'm not quite honed in on the overlapping, as you were asking about before. So I generally complete a full cycle, and then I kind of step back and say, okay, what did I learn with that? And then I'll start another cycle. I'm sure I'll get better at that cycle, and I will be able to overlap and then just kind of have a constant cycle of queens available. But I'm not quite there yet, and I realize I have lots more to learn about queen rearing. So that's my first year lesson. Yes, ma'am.
So you're not overlapping, I understand that. So if someone buys a queen, you go and you take it out. What's going on with those two brands?
So, all right. So when I pull a queen out, if I don't have another queen available, I will just let them go ahead and do what they do naturally. Because if there's a working queen in there, they have eggs and they have larvae for them to rear another queen. And I'm okay with that process. If it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, I'll have another queen eventually, and I've got a couple frames and some bees that I can utilize, elsewhere with resources. Any other questions on that? All right. So I put this slide together last year, and it was first year lessons learned. But when Mark invited me to come out, I said, well, maybe I need to amend, and I need to let you guys know about some second-year lessons that I also learned. So I found these things. These are mini-mating nukes. You can see it's considerably smaller. One of the things that I learned in my first year was that it takes a lot of bees to rear queens. It takes a lot fewer bees to fill this box up. It's just roughly a couple of bees. Now, of course, they can't stay in there very long because she'll lay a lot of eggs, and they will quickly outgrow this. But this minimizes my impact on my existing hives. So my second year, I tried these, and I'm rather fond of them. Let's see. So those are the wax sails that I make. In my previous slide, where I started talking about the frames that I made, you notice I had little wooden wedges up there. I upgraded and I bought these little plastic cups. That makes it a lot easier for those little hair rollers or the queen cell protectors to clip on there. So I figured I was doing well enough. Maybe I could start afford to buy some stuff also. So I started using these plastic cups. And you can see here, it makes it so much easier to put those cell protectors on there. Let's see, what have I got here? So I started using these mini-mating nukes. I've had people ask me a lot about ants, and for the first 9 years, I never had any problems with ants. Last year, when I started using these, though, I put these out in the middle of my pasture, and the ants were like, oh, this is wonderful. This guy has given me like half cup or a full cup worth of sugar water. There's hardly any bees in that thing. And they were overrunning a few of those. And they were even building, I would lift the boxes up, and there would be just a beautifully built fire ant hill right under that. And then, of course, there were no bees in there. So what I ended up doing was moving my hives into a less sunny area, and I moved them off of the ground, put them on these cinder blocks edgewise to get them up higher. I've not had any other ant problems. The other reason that I put them in a shaded area is because I was having such a horrible problem with returning queens, and I realized that I would sit out my apiary. One of the things that you like to do when you're a beekeeper, one of the required sets of equipment for beginner beekeepers is a plastic lawn chair so that you can sit out there in your apiary and watch your bees. And so while I was doing that, I noticed that I would have dragonflies circling around. And when you have 80 to 100,000 bees in a given colony, no big deal. It's kind of amazing to watch a dragonfly catch one of your bees and just, it takes 5 to 10 seconds and it consumes that. But I was having a really bad time with my return rate on my queens, and it finally dawned on me that it's probably those dragonflies. And so I noticed that the dragonflies were flying in the open spaces, in the pasture area, in the sunny area. I did not see them in the wooded area immediately behind my apiary. I moved these mating nukes into that shaded area for the ants and for the dragonflies, and I've noticed that my success rate on return has gone up. So those are some of the second year lessons. This thing right here, so you see this is a box of bees inside my house. My wife, she loves me so much, she doesn't mind if I carry a full box of bees into the house because I say, it's so hot outside, Miranda, and I got to bring the bees inside because they're not accepting my grafts. And she let me do it. And what's great too is at night, you turn the light on, they go bzzz, you turn the light out, they get really quiet. Turn the light back on, they go bzzz, and so I stood there probably for 5 minutes. I'm sure they got really aggravated with that. But I had these in, but I thought it was because of the heat. But it was a couple weeks after that I realized that these bees already had a queen bee laying. I found the eggs and larvae. So it wasn't necessarily the heat that was doing this. But again, my wife was nice enough to let me bring the bees in. Oh, okay, so here, the first year, I did not mark my queens, but every single person came up that wanted to buy a queen when they were there, said, are your queens marked? Are your queens marked? Are your queens marked? No, I'm not marking my queens, here's the queen, and trust me, it's this year's queen. Last year, I finally went and bought a queen marking pen. Now, if you look, this is in fact last year. Yes, I know that's the wrong color. I bought my pen at the end of 2018, and I used it all of 2019. But it was marked queen. I would tell them, I'd say, I'm sorry, it's this year's queen, but it's the only marker that I have. I'm cheap. I didn't want to buy all 5 colors. But this year, I did, in fact, a month ago, I bought all 5 colors, so I'm going to keep my colors the same on part one here. Any other questions? So the markers, in any beekeeping supply magazine, they have the markers. I'm trying to think. So, Posca. This is, I've noticed, I can't read anything else but that. It's in Chinese. But these are what are sold in the magazines. But I got these, I go to Amazon for most of the stuff. Unless there's, I can't find it on Amazon, then I'll go to the specialty places.
Did you hand mark it, or did you?
So, the first year, the reason I didn't mark my queens was because I had trouble capturing the queens and getting them to hold still long enough for me to mark them. So what I ended up buying is one of these single hand queen catchers. And this is great. I love this thing. It's just so easy to catch her. Able to put it on the frame, move the bees out of the way, slowly close it up, all one hand, set the frame down, and then you can focus on getting the queen. There's a little plunger in here, kind of push her up, the workers come out through the excluder there, and so this is what I ended up using. That's probably the main reason why my first year I didn't mark queens. I didn't want to manhandle them, but I came across this and I started using this. Any other questions? None? I just did such an awesome job. All right. Well, I hope that I left you with this feeling that you're going to run home, you're going to start queen rearing and think, I got this. But I will stick around for a little while. I'm not sure. I assume that you guys will finish up with regular business for your meetings. But I'll stick around till Mark kicks me out. And I'd love to talk with you guys and answer any questions that you have. Thank you so much.